Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome. I'm Bronwen Maddox. I'm Director of the Institute for Government, and welcome to those of you on live stream as well. We're delighted to have here Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the CBI. As you know, has had many roles in media, business, government, regulatory agencies, and has been, as they say, in the thick of it in the past couple of years, commenting on business and indeed on Brexit. And we have a lot to talk about this morning. This is a wide-ranging in conversation. We plan these things sometime in advance, but the timing could not be better. So, Karen, very warm welcome for a start.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Bronwen. Quite a day, as you say.
We can't help but start with Brexit. 6 months.
No surprises.
6 months. Good, bad.
Member reaction this morning from businesses. It will be a brief moment of relief because actually, you know, that real concern that we were hitting the cliff edge this Friday was there. But it will be quickly followed by frustration, exasperation. We're still here. 6 months will come around extremely quickly. I think members will already be thinking, but that's the run up to Christmas. And how they start at what they do with their no-deal planning. So I'm afraid there'll be no dancing in the streets around this, and I wouldn't expect to see much in the way of ramping down of no-deal planning.
And so that no-deal planning is still very much going on in businesses?
It really is. I was with one business the other day who talked about the fact he's burning money every day. He literally feels he's lighting a bonfire under cash because of stockpiling, the warehouse capacity that's needed, the preparation that they're needing for delays at borders. And that is wasted. And I think the fact that I think we believe that the economy is now 1 to 2% smaller as a result. I think many commentators believe that. And it has been a real cost to the economy that will continue.
Let's back off a bit and just look back over the last couple of years. And you know, business started at the beginning, very keen to make its voice heard with government. How successful do you feel that was?
Well, I think there was just a real shock at the beginning. You know, I think when the referendum result hit, it was unexpected. It was very unexpected for business, and there was a tremendous sense of shock. And it took a while for the business voice to get going, I think, after that. But where I think it has been very effective is if you look back to when the transition period was agreed. It seems like, you know, dim and distant history now, but actually it was an incredibly important moment about 1.5 years ago where business got together, many big and small, and said, actually, we need a status quo transition to be able to bridge to the future. And actually, both Brussels and Westminster said, no, absolutely, resoundingly, big raspberry. And within 8 weeks, it was actually government policy, it was Labour Party policy, and if a deal is agreed, it is what will happen. And I think that was the beginning of the business voice really beginning to come through, talking about, I think, some very simple principles. Frictionless trade, the impact that has on jobs in manufacturing communities, the importance of a deal for services, the importance of regulatory alignment. And I think that sort of the voices of business talking about real people in real communities has grown over time. And so, you know, even today, I do sit here and think, we could have gone over the cliff. Actually. A year ago, I don't believe there was a consensus in Parliament against no deal, and now there is. And that is real progress. And what we now need, I think, is for that voice to continue to be about real jobs in real communities. And actually what you would have seen us talking about today is we must have political compromise now to get this deal done so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation in 6 months' time.
I'll come on to that deal, but I'm surprised and impressed that you put so sunny construction onto the last couple of years, because after all, I mean, the Prime Minister took quite early on a stance against the customs union, against the single market, and we still have a significant block of the Conservative Party, the party of business supposedly, apparently wanting no deal, a block within Parliament.
Yes.
Doesn't this represent at least, if not a failure by the business community to get its voices heard in what should it be its constituency, then a loss of interest, perhaps in the Conservative Party, in those arguments?
I don't think I really quite see it that way. I mean, I'm not feeling hugely sunny. I don't think don't want to come across hugely sunny, but I do think that because we are still in a mess. I mean, we wake up this morning and we're still in a mess. But I do think that it is worth logging progress, because I think you can learn from it and what has worked in terms of that dialogue that we have to have about what business can do for the country and why it matters so much to get this right. And we can all have our own diagnosis of where things went wrong very early on. I do think that it was a real missed opportunity to have those red lines put in the sand so early on. And I look back at key moments, and for me there was that moment which started at the Conservative Party conference when Theresa May stood up and talked about them and then confirmed them at Mansion House. And we've been we've been trying to climb back from that ever since. And I think we have made some ground. Is it enough? Absolutely not. That's why we are still in a mess. But I would say that almost MP by MP, constituency by constituency, we've had so many businesses who've got in touch with their MPs, talked about their local plant, the local Haribo plant, the local JLR plant, and talked in real terms. And as I say, I do think that's why you have seen some of the votes go the right way in Parliament over the last few weeks. Not enough, there's still not enough agreement, but we've ruled out, at least for the next 6 months, a no-deal exit, and that is something I think that is worth recognising and building on.
I absolutely take that point. What do you think the level of understanding of customs union and single market is in, first, I'm going to say Parliament, and we, as many in the country, were very struck by the way MPs were having a seminar, a kind of masterclass on what is a customs union just before one of the key votes a couple of weeks ago.
It is
a couple of weeks ago.
Exactly. What could be learned, in 14 days, and customs union has become almost totemic. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading a book by David Campbell Bannerman that was written a few years ago about how it'd be very easy to leave the European Union, and a foreword written by Lord Lamont, when customs union isn't even mentioned. I mean, it's not mentioned the foreword. It is not. It has not been a key part of the debate, and I think levels of understanding are extremely low. I mean, the number of MPs I still speak to who do think it comes with freedom of movement obligations, that it requires regulatory alignment in totality, and of course it doesn't. And there I think actually your challenge is absolutely fair, Bronwen. Why isn't there? Could we have done more to educate? But there has to be a sort of a listening ear on the other side. And the problem with the customs union debate now, I think it's quite frustrating for those of us in business, because actually it's quite a kind of common sense arithmetic equation. Is it worth more to the UK to have free trade deals around the world where you're trading tariffs, or is it worth more to preserve frictionless trade in the European Union? And you can work out those two numbers. And the answer on the first is about 1 to 2% of GDP uplift, and the answer on the second is more like 6 or 7%. And you do that arithmetic. And when people say to us, well, we couldn't have an independent trade policy, I think one of my answers is this would be a pillar of an independent trade policy. It's a sovereign choice to do that. And so I think and if there's sort of one sort of central, and I would almost call it a lie at the heart of this debate, and I know that's quite strong language, but I do feel very strongly about it, is this idea that you have to choose between doing trading with the European Union and trading globally, and that's what the customs union debate comes down to. It doesn't. And if that becomes, in a sense, the centre of compromise over the next few days and weeks between Labour and Tory, I do think that we as a business community can help, hopefully, to take some of the heat out of it.
Let's go to no deal for the moment. As you said, it's off the menu this week, but we, all kinds of conditions attached to the extension, and we know some Brexiteers are hoping that bad behaviour by the UK under this Prime Minister or another could indeed cause us to come out. And of course, as you said, 6 months from now, the questions come back again. How prepared are your members for no deal?
I think they're not very prepared. I can be absolutely honest, and I think they're not very prepared because they can't be very prepared. I mean, it's one of these one of these sort of interesting tricks of language that I'm often asked, are businesses ready? And what I would say is many of them are, particularly the big companies, are as ready as they can be. but it's mitigation. It's like, you know, putting down sandbags if you think there's going to be a flood. It doesn't prevent the chaos and the disruption. And you know, what we know is that even the most ready of our members, and actually only 4% say they're completely ready. 4% say they're completely ready. They are prepared for disruption at ports, tariff schedules that have been launched, will be launched on a country with only very, very minimal notice. And so I think that they are not ready. And the small businesses, frankly, quite rationally, many have done absolutely nothing at all. As many as 50% of small businesses have done nothing at all. And again, you can say, well, why haven't they? Come on, we've been talking about this for ages.
Explain the quite rationally to everyone. Yeah.
So the quite rationally is that if you're a small business, for a start, you don't have, and I've spoken to so many, they are very frank with me, and they say, listen, we don't have a big central department of lots of people who can work all of this out. We're trying to run our business, and often they're small exporters and they are trying to run their business. And what they say to me is, you know, if a no deal, probability of no deal is, and they often estimated it at between 10 and 20%, something like that. And the cost to me of preparing for no deal is millions, and even for a small business it quite often is, because they might need to move a plant or a production line. They say quite rationally, I'm not going to spend that money unless I know that 20% risk has come true. So this isn't stupidity, this is rational common sense. The businesses that have absolutely, I mean, there is one sector I think that is ready, and that's banking. I think the financial services sector are ready because, frankly, it's illegal not to be compliant in the event of no deal. And so they have had to do a lot. For many small businesses... You'd
extend that to insurance as well,
insurance,
and all this. Yeah,
insurance, asset management, banking, and parts of pharma, because they are heavily regulated. But for most businesses, this isn't a question of law. This is a question of rational risk assessment. So we have huge swathes of our SME community who have done nothing at all, and they still won't do anything at all. So the shock of a no deal, frankly, would be absolutely enormous. And you know, there are so many parties, so many sectors of our community saying that, you know, the farmers, the NHS, ourselves, Federation of Small Business. I think people in general believe it, but it still worries me greatly that there are some who don't.
How would you react to the emergence of Boris Johnson as Conservative Party leader?
Well, I suppose what rings in our ears is his famous expletive, which you know, was. I think that was just an enormous shock to. I mean, you mentioned it earlier on, Bronwen, that the relationship between the Conservative Party and business has in general been very good. And actually, I think in general, the relationship between government and business over decades has been very good. We've developed a progressive economy with you know, a strong welfare state, good base of tax funding, and actually we've been a successful economy with a good partnership. And the idea that, you know, a Conservative minister would say that, I think, was deeply shocking. Now, he's tried to explain it, retract it, etc. But I think that there would need to be some real bridge building. He has not, I don't believe, talked very much to business. We would be saying, you know, come and meet our members, come and hear what really matters. And we would, as we've always done, try and build those bridges. But there would be, I think, deep concern amongst the business community. But that said, you know, we have worked with different leaders all the way through the 60-year life of the CBI. You know, we will be the first to be trying to meet him and talk to him about all of this.
To take a few points from the Brexit point of view, I mean, some of the Brexit supporting MPs and other supporters would say, look, single market hasn't been great for the UK in all kinds of ways, even it's been good in some other ways, and we've got enormous trade deficit in goods with the EU, which the IMF has just said is, you know, is unsustainable. What would be your response to that?
I think our response to that is that successful trade policy begins at home. Actually, it begins with having the right competitive environment to make goods and services that people want to buy. And actually the structural issues with our trade deficit, I would argue, do not stem from our relationship with the single market, which I think is broadly speaking good. It's not unalloyed good. You know, we've done a lot of work over the years on the pros and cons of the regulatory environment in the single market, and we do think it's been overly bureaucratic in some ways. But on balance, the fact it creates a frictionless trade environment to 500 million consumers is good. The trade imbalance, which is serious and structural, I think comes from something else. It comes from actually the fact that we have, I don't think, created enough of an industrial strategy around manufacturing. We have in automotive and aerospace, interestingly, where we have trade surpluses. So we have some areas where we have proven it can be done. But actually, this is far more about how we get our skills base working, how we get real commitments to industrial strategy across the country. We get firing on all cylinders in parts of the country that it starts at home.
These are homegrown problems.
These are homegrown problems.
And the numbers are really quite something. I mean, it's gone from 4 billion to 94 billion since 2001. And so your attention would be on these homegrown problems, nothing to do with the EU, in terms of trying to close that trade gap.
I wouldn't say completely nothing, in that I think that being in the European Union, influencing regulatory environments so that they are conducive to competitiveness would had we stayed, would have needed to continue, because I think there are areas of heavy-handed regulation. But on balance, I think no. And actually, as evidence for that, I think if you look at our, something we've been quite obsessed by at the CBI is productivity, and the fact that we have a productivity gap with our peers in the European Union. We have 20% lower productivity than France and 30% lower than Germany. And that actually is a fundamental driver of our trade deficit. Now, the thing that is, I think, actually a potential real opportunity if we can get Brexit right is that we are seeing a renaissance in manufacturing. It's very interesting. We are seeing record export levels for manufacturers. We are seeing some fantastic tech investment going in at the high end of advanced manufacturing. And we are seeing the renaissance that we've been longing to see coming through. It would be such a shame if that got halted in its tracks by new frictions appearing in our trading model.
Let's come on to Labour, and I'm very interested in your views of whether what Labour is saying represents a profound challenge to thinking and to relations between government and business you've been describing over the past few decades, or not, and how you would begin to work with Labour. We've had a set of suggestions already from John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor, what you might call smaller things like raising the minimum wage, getting slightly larger to worker representation on company boards, obviously the renationalisation proposals, and then what many economists and business people consider the most provocative, recommending that businesses give 10% of their equity to workers and government. How are you responding to these, and how are you engaging with Labour on them?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I was with John McDonnell at the Labour Party conference where he made that announcement of basically a 10% share confiscation proposal. And we responded extremely strongly. I responded to his face extremely strongly. I mean, not least because they hadn't had any conversations with business at all, so it was full of holes. So, for example, domestic companies would have to give up 10% of share capital, and foreign-owned subsidiaries wouldn't. Going back to the trade deficit, what's a bigger driver of that than that? And what I would say, what was very interesting is that I said to him, listen, we understand the questions you're asking. So you want to raise employee engagement, you want to raise the stake that the working people of this country have in our economy. And we get that and we support that. Can we come and talk to you about better ways of doing it? So actually we've got a conversation going on now with the shadow front bench, Labour shadow front bench, about other ideas for doing this. So we know that 85% of companies already have share ownership schemes. Let's find ways of turbocharging them. We back you in the problem you're trying to fix, but don't do something stupid that is going to damage the investability of our economy, just at a time when we have question marks over our heads anyway. And actually the reaction was positive. So listen, I think we are under...
And just to be clear, you would call that particular proposal of forcing companies to give 10% of their equity away stupid?
What we know is that the day after that proposal was announced, it was debated in at least 4 international boardrooms that we know around the world, and they were putting in place plans to move headquarters were it to happen. So I would. And I think that is recognised, actually. Now, there are other areas where we have looked Labour in the eye and said, will you engage in a conversation with us? And they have said, no, we won't. So, for example, the nationalisation of utilities, that is a hell-bent set course. And we are deeply concerned about that. So there's no kind of rose-tinted spectacles view of we have to build this relationship. This may be a party of government. And again, I go back to the fact that I think business has to work with all shades and hues of government. The thing I think that is, and I think we also have to accept that this Labour government, this Labour Party, is reflecting deep-held concerns in the public. These are really deep-held concerns about inequality, about unfairness, about poor service in public services, about lack of trust. And if we don't find ways of responding to those, we will be regulated in ways that are actually bad for investment and bad for jobs in the long run. So I think we have to lean into this in an intelligent and open-minded way, but also hitting out things that are stupid. So, for example, on nationalisation, we are engaging with them on just, again, other ways of improving service levels and trust in the nationalised industries. Because, again, the investability of our country is at stake. One of the biggest problems with the nationalisation proposals is that John McDonnell has said that the price will be determined by Parliament, not by the market. I mean, again, that starts making us sound like a banana republic. I mean, that's expropriation. And these are the areas where I think it is worth having, I hate to use the word red lines, but I think there have to be some, because when I travel abroad, I was in Tokyo for the B20 meeting 3 weeks ago, which is the prelude to the G20. I was talking to a lot of peer investors and businesses about how they see the UK at the moment. And there is still a willing suspension of disbelief about how, because people see the UK as open, tolerant, business-friendly. We are doing a very good job of undermining that at the moment. And the idea that we would do things that make us look as though we will expropriate private capital, that we will take money away from shareholders with no recompense, are just things we have to not do. So that's the dialogue problem. I'm not saying it's easy, but I see Jeremy Corbyn on a quarterly basis, John McDonnell more often than that. We spend about 30% of our time at the moment building these relationships. And I think it's incredibly important that we do that.
And that's obviously one powerful way that business has of making its views known. Back in the CBI, you go and talk to Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. What other ways do businesses have? One of the things we spend a lot of time talking about here, we notice, is that demonstrations are becoming an ever more popular way of people expressing their voice. They often go past the IFG. Not with IFG people attending, I have to say. And just the sense of that the public, is finding ways to make people making their voices known very directly to MPs, and obviously this flood of social media going into MPs. Business, they have you in your dialogue with Jeremy Corbyn, they can say things, but how are they responding to this need to get their views across in a very changed environment of political communication?
I think it's a great question, and I think businesses themselves are feeding it from their employees and from all the time, every day. Did your intern have a good experience? What does Glassdoor say about your business? The kind of feedback, and I think it's extremely powerful and extremely helpful. And what you are now seeing, I think, is many businesses responding to that by being much clearer about purpose, much more transparent, because you have to be, particularly the millennial generation. They see things very differently. And I think it was fantastic to see school children out on the streets about climate change. I got pushed on it quite hard. What does this do for kind of, teaching and learning science and all of that? But actually, in terms of what employers want, they really want, children, young people who are going to stand up, be counted, speak out, speak up. So I think this is powerful. In terms of how business communicates, I mean, what's been very interesting, we've had a lot of challenge from MPs saying, can't you talk to more MPs? Can't your businesses get in and meet? And actually, one of the challenges is if you're an MP, there's such a cacophony coming in of voices the whole time. One MP showed me that they have 400 emails, tweets and texts a day from second referendum, no deal, do this, do that. So I have to say, I actually think that this is, that we have to gather almost movements. So business needs to, as everybody else is, movements around, for example, the contribution that business can make to preparing young people for the opportunities of the next generation, skill building. It's going to be much more about getting waves of thinking coming through social media that I think can change minds.
Let me ask you one thing, finally, picking up on this theme of how government deals with the private sector. We've done a lot of work here and have really quite a big programme on just that, with a lot of work on outsourcing and procurement. And obviously incidents like Carolyn and Interserve getting into trouble and probation endlessly give us cause to write about this. But we are digging deeper behind that into the conditions in which this works and doesn't work well, and how government handles it. And we're obviously talking about a 30-40 year experiment in government handing over more things to the private sector. And yet it's hard to get deeply into these relationships without seeing that while some of them work very well, as finally some of the London transport and tube ones did after a bad start, but many don't, and we run into pockets of government, I would say, where the understanding of business is poor, and the understanding of the private sector, of the importance of cash flow, of this kind of thing. What is your take on this? We've really had a 30-40 year, project of government trying to work much more actively with business to deliver the things that government wants to deliver to the public. And yet we end up with...
And it's been mixed, and it's been a mixed experience. I think that we have to recognise it's been a mixed experience. And, I mean, there are good examples, and there are some on the doorstep. But there have been too many bad ones. And the trouble with every bad one, every, failed hospital experience or failed IT project just sets the whole relationship back, a very long way. And yet, what we know is that for government to transform, A, it needs private sector money, and B, actually, it needs private sector innovation. And so I think that we've got to reboot it. And with everybody, I think, putting their hand up and saying things haven't gone right on both sides. So if I had to say, in terms of the private sector side, I think that there's probably been too much of a keenness to take on projects that probably weren't the right ones. On the government side, cost has been everything, and quality hasn't necessarily been high up on the list. But if we are going to completely renew our transport infrastructure, we are going to have state-of-the-art hospitals, we are going to try and be an incredibly modern, successful economy in this new era, we've got to get this right. So we've been part of working with Cabinet Office to try and, I think, almost put blame on one side. There is so much finger-pointing that goes on. And I think one of the problems that we see is the whole narrative coming off the back of Carolyn is so incredibly negative. You look at Interserve, you look at Mighty, that the whole sector is in trouble. We're going to end up with the sector withdrawing from public sector, and I think we will be worse off as a result. So we need a reset that is about quality. It's not always about cost. And the private sector itself, I think, needs to be doing things differently, much more concerned with trust and standards and transparency than it has in the past.
Thanks for that. Let's go to some questions. And if there's anyone next door who wants to ask a question, please stick your head round. Let's go here on the edge first.
James Kidner from Improbable. We're a technology startup. Fascinating discussion, and clearly telling a story that is an unhappy story of a rift right down the middle of the nation. You talk as the voice of business. Can you give us some encouragement that within some businesses, this fracture between the sort of Brexit angry and the Brexit desperate has been bridged at all? Are there any lessons that the wider public can learn from business models here?
Well, I mean, it is the whole Brexit fracturing, I think, has been desperate for the public and it's been desperate for business. In terms of what business, I think there are actually many business leaders who would stand back from this and they would say, how would they have dealt with this problem of having very seriously competing views? And I think one of the things that they would do is they would seek to build consensus. That kind of frustration that we all feel that we have an adversarial party system that doesn't seem to be able to reach across boundaries. I mean, I think it is absolutely fascinating that if you look at the Prime Minister's deal and what it says about customs, it's not actually that far from being a customs union. It's really not. And what we've got almost is a system that doesn't allow compromise. It's not that it doesn't foster it, it actually prevents it. And I think there are European countries looking, I think, aghast at the fact we aren't able to do that. So I think what you would learn from business, and I'm not holding business up as having a lot of the answers here, but you would have, I think, a system, something set up within a company that said we're going to bring people together, we're going to work it through, we're going to have a process, and come out the other side. I mean, I look at some of the battles you do have within companies, for example, between old banking and digital banking. I mean, those can be wars within companies. And the best businesses, and I think some of our big banks are actually getting to grips with this, they are sorting out a compromise and they're sorting out a transition. So our huge hope off the back of this sort of reprieve that we've got, a 6-month reprieve, is that it's used to set up a process. And it's not just people locked in a room on their own, which we've seen in the last few days. I mean, I think that's a good start, and from what we see, it is in good faith. But why not have a 3 to 4 month process now that actually properly brings civic society in? It could bring the TUC in, it could bring us in, it could be cross-party, and it could ask the question, what kind of Brexit do we want? We should have done it 2 years ago. Why don't we do it now? We personally might have liked a slightly longer extension to enable that to happen, but actually this focuses minds. So I think, James, that will be the lesson from business. It's how you create compromise in a system that doesn't naturally deliver it.
Thanks. One here.
Thank you, Carolyn. Christina Yenzhang from QS. Our UK university play a very vital role in our knowledge transfer and our impact globally. But previously the immigration policy is not that friendly and we are losing out massively. But now with Brexit, a lot of European students and staff are quite concerned about their futures. So what do you think we might be able to do, to try to ensure our global position on our research and knowledge transfer?
Great question, thank you.
It's an absolutely great question. And going back to, if you're a Martian looking down at the UK, or you're sitting in Tokyo looking at the UK, what are we good at? One of the things we are absolutely fantastic at is our higher education. And our universities are world class. We've got 4 in the top 10 globally. How amazing that is. And yet, we seem to be in the situation at the moment where we are undermining them from within. And a combination of our immigration policy and various kind of attacks on our universities are, I think, deeply damaging. At the CBI, we've been expanding our university membership. We have most British universities are now members of the CBI. And we are absolutely thrilled about that because we see universities as being central to industrial strategy. Universities are also businesses. They are competing on a world stage. And we just need to have a much stronger cherishing and support for our universities. Having said that, universities also do need to change. And there is an adaptation we need to how we prepare young people for the future. But that's a conversation that we can have. So out of all of this, again, thinking longer term, Brexit must be sorted so we can have this conversation about where our strengths lie and what kind of economy we want to be. Knowledge-based, universities at our heart, great science base, advanced manufacturing, outstanding, and our services base is second to none. So how we build these strengths must be, the national conversation we have, not Brexit.
Okay, right over here.
Carolyn, thank you very much for a very compelling and persuasive overview. John Burt, House of Lords. Is not our root problem that we no longer have any party of business? We have confiscation at one end and expletives at the other. Arithmetic has not persuaded those who have a true religious fervour. Is not the question how you in particular can win over the centre ground?
John, it's such a great question, and I think it is absolutely the right one. It was, I think, a real wake-up call going into the last election when there was no pro-business manifesto on the table from any party. Many people who've been in the CBI much longer than I have said this has never happened before. And why is that? I think I put it down to the fact that we have had 2 decades of totally flat productivity growth, and people just have not got better off. They have not got better off. It's not just a UK phenomenon, it's a Western democratic phenomenon. The rising boats have not happened, and unless we can address that, unless we can, so along with that, we have had just a rising sense of unfairness. Inequality has risen. It's regional, it's social, it's ethnic, it's gender, and they have risen to the top of the pile. And unless we as business address those fundamental issues, politics is just a manifestation of those. And one of the things that we have been doing at the CBI is spearheading a campaign that we called Everyone's Business, which is absolutely about the role that business has to play in addressing these issues of inequality and low productivity. And it's why I go back to, Bronwen, your question about so many of the things we see are symptoms. So our trade imbalance is a symptom. So many things are symptoms. The fundamental causes are we do not have enough high-value, well-paid jobs in our country, and we particularly don't have enough of them in the north of England and some of our deindustrialised cities. And yet, what I would also say is we do have some fantastic examples of where we see that kind of regeneration happening. I don't know if many of you have been to Hull recently. It's an extraordinary story of success on the back of being a city of culture and creative companies going there. Dundee, on the back of the oil crisis, now regenerating with tech companies. Manchester, similarly, the centre of Manchester, Cardiff, Belfast. We do have great stories that are being led by business investment and creating the kind of jobs that we want to see. We just don't have enough of it. We don't have enough of it. And if there is one thing that we have to do coming out of this mess that we're in, we have to go back to the causes of Brexit, the causes of the lack of political support for business, and we have to address them. And I have to say, I think a lot of the responsibility sits with business itself. It really does. We can't be sitting here blaming politicians, blaming the public, It is about what we can do to ensure that we create opportunities for people in all parts of the country. It's about how we recruit, the opportunities that we give to people in our organisations, how we train, how we reskill. And in my view, this is about a new partnership that we need between business and government, one like we've never seen before. And I think that is the opportunity that we've got. And frankly, that would be the conversation I would have with Boris Johnson. That is the conversation I want to have with Jeremy Corbyn. Any of them who get in, this is the only way. We have to grow our way out of this. It is the only answer. And I do think that we have solutions to a lot of problems as a business community. we do create some of the problems, but we have more. And I think that is it's not overnight, John, but I think it's where I want the CBI to be if we can just get beyond this crisis.
It is quite a challenge that John has put down, absolutely rightly though, that after, 30, 40 years with, a big financial crisis and everything, but 30, 40 years of otherwise sustained growth, that public skepticism about business and its ability to deliver growth is so great. Anyway,
it is, and I think there is something else actually, Bron, if I could just say, I was on the board of the Financial Services Authority after the crash, and I think there is still tremendous anger that no one was held to account.
Yes.
And I think we can't underestimate that.
Yes, I was going to say, anyway, we could come on to how much 2008 has to blame for the public mood at the moment, but I think that is absolutely right. In the back here, we've got good time. I should manage to get at least everyone who's got their hands up.
Hi,
at the moment.
James Dinsdale, DIT. Thanks very much, Carolyn, for a great presentation. You kind of touched on it just then, but the room may be aghast, but I'd love to talk about something other than Brexit for like 2 minutes. Gender pay gap figures came out last week. Last year I think it was 9.7%. It felt like this year was quite a big year culturally, I would say, for like women and feminism, with like the kind of aftermath of the Me Too movement. The richest young entrepreneur in the world is a woman, and yet this year the figures have come out and we've managed to get it down 0.1%. I'd be really curious to know what you think about that gap. I know there's a lot of data in there and it means a lot of different things, but I'd be really interested to know what you think about it. And assuming that you aren't happy with it, I'd be really interested to understand what you think businesses, the economy and the government as well, of the role that they can play in changing that gap.
Absolutely great question. And it's part of all of this. Gender unfairness is part of what we're talking about. So first of all, I stood on the record as saying I wish we'd come up with the idea of gender pay gap reporting. I'd say at CBI, we're hugely supportive of it. What you can measure, you can change. And we are coming out very, very strongly in favour of ethnicity pay gap reporting, just to say that. So in terms of where things have gone over the last year, 9.7, it's too high. It is just too high. I think everybody knows now that it's mostly, there are isolated exceptions, most of this has got nothing to do with equal pay for equal jobs. This is about the kind of roles that women take in our businesses. And again, I think business holds a lot of the keys to changing that. And I've been campaigning since the day I got to the CBI for some of those things. A lot of it has to do with how you recruit, how you evaluate, hugely how you welcome women back after maternity leave. We don't get that right. We don't recognise the challenges of what that feels like. I've had 3 children. I know what that feels like. So that's all part of it. The one thing I would say just about this year's results, and I think this is I don't want to sound like an apologist, but I'm going to say one thing. It is very early days. So we've surveyed this year. 93% of our members have taken action to address their gender pay gap. It is going to take time. And I would hope to see that really start moving the next couple of years. I do go back to women on boards. You remember the whole kind of objective to get to 25% women. I just dug those numbers out the other day. They moved from 12% to 26% over 5 years. The first 2 years, they didn't budge at all because the actions were being taken. And there's a lag, and it takes time. So all I would say is we need to keep the pressure on. I think that there's a lot of action going on. What the pay gap numbers have done is create competition. And what we also know is 80% of women looking for jobs look at the gender pay gap of the company they might join before they apply. That's how you get change. So I'm an optimist. I wish it was lower, but give it a bit more time.
Thanks very much. Over here. Yep.
Thank you. Joe Dilger, Data Protection Officer for University of Winchester. My question is related to education again. With the Department for Education announcing the sites of the new 12 institutes of technology, do you and the CBI welcome those institutes of technology and the role they should play in closing the digital skills gap?
Hugely. I live in Winchester, great university.
I did wonder if you were going to say no.
No, absolutely. We have a massive challenge in digital skills training. And actually there's a big gender issue, actually, which we need to fix. But unless we have concerted, strategic action, then we won't get anywhere. And again, I think one of the things that, it's almost a general point I would make about our industrial strategy at the moment, is that we're doing a lot of the right things, but we're not doing them big enough or bold enough. And I think digital skills training is an example of that. We have about, I think at last count, about 150 different initiatives to build digital skills. If you are a business or if you are an ordinary person, it's incredibly confusing. So I think one of the challenges I would put back to the new institutes is how you can be true conveners in your local region and make it simple for people to be able to find that pathway into training. I think all the research we have shows that it needs to be boot camp, quick, smart training, how you reach people who you might not otherwise reach and help to close some of the inequality gaps that we're talking about. But huge supporters, but think big, I think, and think simple.
Thanks. Here on the arm.
Thank you. Joe Grice, ONS. Actually, you mentioned quite a lot of the points I was going to make in your reply to John Burt, but it does seem to me that productivity is pretty central to the story, both politically and economically. And you said, Bronwen, that actually we had 40 years of what's happened over the last decade is not typical of the last 40 years. It's not typical of the last 160 years, according to the McKinsey work. So it really is this period of sustained lack of productivity growth, lack of living standards really is pretty special. But my question then is, you talk about the national conversation, this ought to be the national conversation, and that seems right to me once we get through Brexit. But what would it look like? And the government does have a productivity plan. It looks pretty tired and pretty stereotyped. But how would that agenda best be taken forward in a more kind of productive way, given that actually the last 12 years has shown very few results?
So, again, I think that is a very good question, because we have got to do things differently. One of the things that I don't think as the UK we've been very good at industrial strategy. In fact, we really haven't. We have, over the last sort of 50 years, we've had them, torn them up, new government comes in, tears it up, and actually business today is looking at the modern industrial strategy created by the Prime Minister with kind of, how long is this going to last? And I wonder if there isn't just something quite big that we're learning from the Brexit process, which is that it's not just Brexit where we need a collaboration cross-party. It's actually our national strategy as a country where we need to be doing things differently. I was looking at our skills policy the other day, and there's a lot of finger pointing that goes on there. Why haven't we got the skills base? And I looked at the number of changes there have been in skills policy over the last 30 years. There have been 29. There have been one a year. And you wonder why businesses are confused and they don't get behind things. And why don't we start a completely different kind of national conversation over the autumn? Why doesn't it become a cross-party question about what kind of Britain we want to be that does involve many different parties? I mean, I think you could begin to list them, but I think you would want to involve, for example, regional mayors, who I think have been very powerful in speaking up for their region in an apolitical way. You could involve the regional mayors, you could involve the Trade Union Congress, you could involve us, you could involve the Federation of Small Business, you could involve the Archbishop of Canterbury. You could go really broad and ask those questions about what does it take to have those big, bold moves around skills, around infrastructure. I mean, our infrastructure is absolutely falling apart. And yet we don't have any means of attracting private sector investment at scale. We've abolished PFI, basically. There is nothing in its place. How do we create something new that has public trust? So that's how I would do it. I would find a way of creating a new kind of conversation that has longevity, and that you get political parties on both sides to say that is the industrial strategy for the next 20 years that we're going to sign up to, and stop this business of tearing policy up every 5 years, which I think has been so disruptive.
We have very good charts on just how many industrial policies, further education policies, regional policies there have been in the past 40 years. Here. And any last bids for questions, because we're coming to the end. Right, I'm going to take all these three at once.
Carolyn, sounded a bit tiggerish to me, what you just said. But my question is about the media, which you haven't mentioned at all.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether the CBI thinks that the media is giving business a fair shout, and whether there's more that could be done in that area.
Thank you. Would you like to say your name for the record?
Adelbis.
Okay. Thanks. Did you mean tiggerish in the cartoon character or in the New Independent Party?
New Independent, there is something...
Just to be clear, actually we've got time to get all three in, so let's take them one at a time.
Great. I got very frustrated with the media during the Brexit campaign. Because this kind of sense of there having to be, one Leave voice, one Remain voice, whereas actually what we know from every business survey is that 75% of businesses were in favour of Remain. Now that's water under the bridge, but I think there is something really important here about how business is reported. Actually I saw Kamal Ahmed from the BBC yesterday to have exactly this conversation. If we're going to have this kind of conversation about what kind of country we want to be and the role that business is going to play in it, I do think we need a different kind of reporting. We need to be talking about the skills for the next generation, the good stuff as well as the bad stuff. That said, I've been on the other side of the BBC for a long time. We have to make it interesting. We have to make it interesting. We have to be talking about real people and real lives. And one of the things I'm just very struck by is that what's something that unites us all? Something that unites us all is that we care about the next generation, either as nieces, as children, as grandchildren, as neighbours. And if we could have that conversation about the role that business can play in creating opportunities for the next generation, I think that unites everybody. And I would really hope that the media would play a really big part in that and get behind it. Because otherwise, every time we have a negative, every time there's a Carillion, every time there's there's a bad story, then we just get set back miles. So the onus is on us, I think, to be interesting, to have the great stories, and to talk about real people and real lives.
There will be a long debate packed into that, whether the media sees it as its job to get behind anything. Let's not have that debate now.
Electra, House of Commons.
Hi.
To what extent is the CBI and business more widely thinking about or planning priorities for Phase 2 future relationship negotiations with the EU?
Yeah.
And how do you envisage the relationship between business and government during that negotiations should or could work for the benefit of Biden?
That's such a great question, because if I hadn't talked about this, I'd have walked out and regretted it, because it's hugely important. And I think that one of the things we're all struck by is it could actually happen any day. I mean, that may be wishful thinking, but I don't think so, that we could find ourselves very quickly into Phase 2, and it has to be completely different from Phase 1. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about this. And the trouble is, it will be a very quick mindset change. So we've all been in that kind of controversy, conflict, and suddenly we are across the table from the European Union with the biggest trade negotiation in the UK's history. And are we ready? We have set out some quite big thoughts for government that are with them now. We are members of this new Strategic Trade Advisory Group, and so we have a locus here. But the very, very first thing we need to do in those first few weeks is we need to set a strategic framework for what we want as a country from those negotiations. We didn't do it at the beginning of Phase 1. We instead had the red lines. We didn't set out the strategic objectives for what we want in terms of which sectors, the importance of services, for example. Services have been horribly neglected in Phase 1, partly because of the huge importance of the Irish border, which we don't belittle for a minute, but it has meant that services has taken second stage. So we need to spend a good few weeks setting out our strategic priorities. Then there needs to be real nitty-gritty engagement between business and government. in real time. It will require non-disclosure agreements signed. There have to be phone numbers of experts in the hands of officials so that they can get them very quickly. And then the final phase is implementation. We've never done this before, but what we do know is how Canada, Australia and New Zealand do it. And we've been lifting lots of leaves from their playbook. We have been taking them into government. We have to all be ready for it the day it happens, and it could be very, very soon. One of the things I think I would say is that we think that the civil service has actually risen in the circumstances really well in terms of business engagement with us, and particularly in the preparation for no-deal planning. So some of these muscles are there, but they've been uncomfortable about how much they can share with business. That trust hasn't been there. We need to find a way of creating that trust. Other countries do it, the EU will have it, and we need to create it, but we'll certainly be there on the other side to make it work.
Thanks. I think we have reached the end both of time and of questions. Was there one more down here? No. Would you like, you do have 1 minute in which you can squeeze in a question, both of you. Thank you.
Anita Panwani, Independent Risk Advisor. In terms of this agenda and strategy, where do you see British business overseas in terms of the new partners we need to be trading with, particularly in respect of modern slavery and supply chain transparency and protecting workers' rights in other developing countries?
Yeah. I mean, we are very ambitious about the UK's role around the world. For example, our role in Belt and Road and our role in India. I mean, I think that we have, again, the whole Martian view back in the UK, we are famous for our great corporate governance, rule of law, and our contribution on the global stage. I think we can carry on doing that. So we should, but we need to get back out there with confidence, and I think that's what the next stage is. It's about renewing our confidence to take those values and those ways of doing business around the world.
We think we being the UK or the CBI?
We being the UK.
The UK. You want us to have a big role in Belt and Road, or you don't?
I do, actually.
Okay.
I do. I mean, with caveats. But the idea that the UK, with all of our strengths in design and build and engineering, would not play a role in the biggest infrastructure project of our generation would just be a missed opportunity for our country. We need to find the right way of doing it. And I'm not here advocating we follow Italy at this point in terms of endorsement, but I am advocating, as our businesses are doing, that we engage, we understand the opportunities, and we compete where we can.
Okay, on that note, thank you all for great questions. Thank you for coming, and join me in thanking Carolyn Fairbairn.